All right, so I'm going to give you a minute or two to talk to each other. So if you're not sitting next to somebody, I want you to talk to each other. First and foremost, when you have your Thanksgiving meal, when it's on the table or on your plate, what is your favorite food on Thanksgiving? What do you like to eat the most? What is that which you have to have? So on Thanksgiving, talk to your neighbor. What is your favorite Thanksgiving food? Now, think about the meal of your childhood. If you've been alive for a long time, think about the meal of your childhood. Is the meal that you eat now the same as the meal you had when you were a kid? Talk to each other. What's different? What's the same? Okay, show of hands. For how many of you is the meal very different now than it was when you were a kid? It's not very many of us. For me, it's very different because the meal that I had as a kid was pretty meager. I mean, it was a big meal for us and our family, but we didn't have much, and so the meals were always smaller. The meal that my adoring wife makes is amazing. It has so many different things. There's just so much all the time. And so that makes my meal that I have on Thanksgiving way different than the meal of my childhood. Now, I want you to just take a thought about the meal that we serve, what's customary in America today, and the original Thanksgiving meal from 1621. Do you think that those meals have much in common? Actually, not hardly at all. And the point is, and the reason for this exercise is to remind us that what we are thankful for changes over time. Just as the Thanksgiving meal has changed over time, so what happens in our heart changes over time. Our heart is different now. What we want, what we think we should be thankful for, that changes as we grow and evolve. Well, first of all, let's just talk about that first Thanksgiving meal. Again, it happened in 1621. It was Pilgrims and the Wampanoag tribe. Pilgrim actually is an interesting word. We come to define the word pilgrim as a group of people, but actually the word actually has a meaning. It means wayfarer. It is someone that moves, and that's what happened. They moved from one country to another. They were pilgrims. They were kind of on a pilgrimage, if you will. And so the pilgrims came and they had meal with the Wampanoag tribe. The Wampanoag is kind of a blanket name for a bunch of sub-tribes that inhabited New England. They're kind of an offshoot of the Algonquin. And they gathered, as folklore has it, they gathered because they had a great harvest. I think that's a little oversimplified. What we know is that the Wampanoag and the Pilgrims actually had a great relationship with and for one another. Again, we have a long history of hostility between the European settlers and our Native American brothers and sisters, but we forget that took a while. It was only when we started saying who owns what land that relationship devolved. The original relationship was actually very cordial and very supportive. Matter of fact, there was a mutual thanksgiving for one another. You see, the Wampanoag actually helped the Pilgrims with seeds, told them what to plant and how to steward those. They called them the Three Sisters. Anybody ever heard of that before? The Three Sisters. They were corn and squash and beans. and that they learned that those worked well together, that how to plant them, how to cultivate them, how to steward the harvest, and how then to store them so that they would be able to get through the winter. Again, think of winter in Massachusetts in the 1600s, brutal. And so the Wampanoag were of great blessing in the midst of the hardship to the Pilgrims. And the Pilgrims were of great blessing to the Wampanoag because their understanding of medicine and how to treat one who is sick exceeded that of the native people. And they actually took in sick Wampanoag tribe members and cared for them and taught them how to better care, saving the lives of indigenous folks. And so there was this mutual respect, and out of hardship came gratitude. Now, when that first meal occurred, the menu was very different. Of course, the three sisters were involved: corn, beans, and squash. They didn't probably have pumpkins as their squash. They had different kinds of squash. But then they didn't have turkey. They had venison. They had lobster. I could do some lobster on Thanksgiving. That'd be pretty sweet. They had lobster, but they also had fowl, but it was waterfowl. Turkey were plentiful, but turkey are actually kind of wild range turkey, are kind of gross, right? Duck is much more succulent, right? And so they likely had duck or goose. Anybody ever have a free-range turkey or a wild turkey? Anybody ever eat one of those? There's a story for a different day of my first year at Thanksgiving in Nebraska when a family said, "Don't buy a turkey, we'll give you one of ours." For a city-fied moron like me, that was quite an experience because it was not a butter bowl. So that meal was born, but it didn't include turkey. Turkey actually wasn't a part of the factor of Thanksgiving until this woman, Sarah Josepha Hale, who wrote a book in 1827 called Northwoods, and she described this quintessential Thanksgiving. She is known as the mother of Thanksgiving. She later wound up actually lobbying President Lincoln, and it was at the tail end of the Civil War, a very hurting nation. She convinced him that a day of thanks was in order, and that's when Thanksgiving was born. But it was her vision, her writing some 50 years earlier about what the Thanksgiving meal should look like, with turkey at the center, that created our kind of meal. So again, the two takeaways from this are the meal has obviously evolved. What we're thankful for evolves over time, just like the meal. And it is hardship that creates thanksgiving. I don't know if you're aware of that or not, but some of the hardest things, overcoming them, make us, in many ways, the most grateful. Those are the places of greatest gratitude when we are in the midst of or have completed the greatest hardship. Psalm 107 is testament to that. Again, if you'd like to open your pew Bible to 548, that would be great, or if you have it online, on your device. Again, it's Psalm 107. We only read half of it because there's a lot to it. And again, those of you online are more than welcome to look in your Bible at home. Again, we're Psalm 107. Psalm 107 is a pattern of a lament psalm, which is kind of interesting because it's different than most of the other laments. You might remember that the Psalms are the hymnal of the people of Israel, God's ancient people. Some 1,000 to maybe 1,500 years before Jesus was born, they would gather for worship, and then the songs would be written down. And the way it usually worked was that one lone person with pain, with their complaints against God, with their places of hurt, they would sing about them, one line, and then the community would turn that and sing about God's praises and kind of would turn their perspective, this crying out in pain, the collective we kind of correct and remind that God is still faithful in the midst of all the hardship. And we see this happening here. Now, this is not a lone voice, but this is the community remembering the hardship and remembering the faithfulness. Remembering the hardship and remembering the faithfulness. And again, the line that we see here is, give thanks to the Lord, for he is good. His steadfast love endures forever. This word steadfast happens over and over and over again in Psalm 107. The word is chesed. And you see it begins with an H, but it starts with a heavy K. So it's chesed. And the Hebrew word chesed means steadfast, for sure, but it means unfailing, reliable, everlasting, never failing. So the never-ending love of God. We keep getting reminded of that over and over and over again in this psalm. For every problem, there's the never-ending love of God. For every hardship, there's the never-ending love of God. The psalm starts with it, it ends with it, and it's everywhere in between, reminding us that God always keeps God's promises. And things might not be easy, but God's always there. And then the second word that's important in this is, you'll see in verse 2, let the redeemed of the Lord say so. Those he redeemed from trouble. That word redeemed is gal, and it's a word that you don't see very often in the Old Testament. When, we as Christians like to look at the Old Testament and see the Messiah everywhere, and sometimes we take that too far. But this is one of the texts where we actually see it. Let the redeemed. That God will redeem, this waiting for a Messiah to come who will redeem everything, who will make all things new. This is what we see. And that, again, that is to avenge, to deliver, to redeem, to transform, to change. The point of the psalm is that God is faithful and God redeems hurt and pain and turns it into thanksgiving. We're fairly effective as a culture, I think, of thinking about redemption and thinking about Jesus as our Redeemer. We're good at saying, I might be horrible, but if my faith is strong, the promise is true, God will redeem me. We're good at that. I think we get that. We're not as good, I think, but we still understand that God sent Jesus into the world to save the entire world, that the world is redeemed through Jesus Christ, that it's not just a me and Jesus thing, but it's the collective we are redeemed. But I think the challenge for us, and I think what we are not so good at, is what we've been talking about throughout with regard to the first Thanksgiving, that this hardship that we have, the hard places can be redeemed. Through Jesus Christ, God redeems everything. Through Jesus Christ, God redeems us in the whole. But through Jesus Christ, God can even redeem the broken pieces, the worst parts of us, the biggest hurts, the heaviest pains. This is why we're talking about this whole series of Thanksgiving, what it was, what it should be. What we should understand is that the places of pain are redeemed. What's the hardest thing that you've got? What's the hardest thing that you've had? Can you see how it can be redeemed? And maybe you can already even feel it as redeemed. I've been really clear over the years that Thanksgiving is my favorite holiday. It absolutely is. I view Thanksgiving as a season. I don't view it just as one day. I mean, after Halloween, we have the Thanksgiving season. No Christmas carols, right? Pumpkin spice, not mint coffee, right? And so we have this season, this month of gratitude. Because it evaporates on Black Friday, right? As soon as Thanksgiving, you don't even get a Thanksgiving weekend, you get a day. And then everybody's Christmas shopping, right? So we make it a season, and the reason why it is my favorite is because it's such a mixed blessing for me in my life. I mean, I've been really clear about this over the years, and so I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole again. But my dad died 2 days after Thanksgiving. He was 51, died of a heart attack. There was nothing we could do to stop it, and I was 20. And that was the hardest thing I'd ever been through. And it was a pain that still exists, and I still feel at times, but it's a pain that I never thought I'd get over. And yet over the years now, I can see how it's been redeemed, how it's been transformed, and how slowly over the course of time, I can see how it's made me a better man, a better pastor, a better husband, a better father. And I feel like the psalmist because it's work that the people closest to me have done. It's work that you as a congregation have done over decades to redeem this hurt. And that is for us what I believe is our trajectory with regard to Thanksgiving. It's really easy to sit down on Thanksgiving Day and say, aren't we lucky to be where we are? Yeah, that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that process. But wouldn't it be better for you in your heart of hearts to say, where's the most broken place that I have? And has God redeemed it to make me better? In a very simplistic way, we're no different than the pumpkin turning into the pumpkin pie. How can we be made better by Christ? And do we feel that redemption in our lives? And can we participate with others in that work of redeeming? Jesus died on the cross to redeem all things. He died on the cross to redeem you. But brothers and sisters, this Thanksgiving, I hope that you will reflect on how he died to redeem your greatest pain. I'm going to pray it be so. Amen.